Chapter 1. The Burden. She carried the wind off the Derbyshire moors, carried with it the scent of rain and wild heather, cool against Evelina Harcourt's cheeks as she stood before the wrought-iron gates of Blackthorn Hall. For hours she had walked the long road from the village, her boots coated in dust, her bonnet drawn low to shield her face from curious eyes. She had not dared hire a carriage, though her savings, what little remained, might have afforded it. To arrive in splendor would be a lie, and Evelina had vowed to meet this burden with honesty, no matter how heavy. Now the gates loomed before her like sentinels. Beyond them, the hall itself rose, ancient and severe, its stone walls stained with ivy, its windows reflecting the pale April sun like watchful eyes. It was not merely a house, but a fortress of memory, whispered about in the village taverns and markets, feared by children and spoken of in hushed tones by their mothers. Evelina wrapped her shawl tighter about her shoulders and breathed deeply. "Mother, give me courage. This is the path you left for me, though I wish it were not so." She remembered her mother's words, written in the last letter before her death, ink faded, the script shaky with illness. "My dearest Evelina, if the day should come when I am no more, you must go to him, to Lord Blackthorn. I owe him a debt I could not repay, and he will ask of you what I could not give. Do not be afraid. He is stern, but he is an honorable man." Evelina had read those words 100 times, searching between the lines for explanation, for any clearer truth. But her mother, Lady Celeste, had taken her secrets to the grave. A voice startled her. "Are you seeking entry, miss?" She turned. A groundskeeper, his face weathered by sun and years, stood by the hedge, hat in hand. His tone was courteous, though his eyes flickered with curiosity. "Yes," Evelina replied, lifting her chin with what dignity she could muster. "I am Evelina Harcourt. I come at the request of Lord Nathaniel Blackthorn." At the sound of his name, the man's brows lifted ever so slightly, and he dipped his head. "Very well, miss. Follow the path. The master will be expecting you." The iron gates creaked open with the groan of something ancient. Evelina stepped forward, her heart pounding, every footfall a reminder that her life was about to change forever. The great hall of the manor swallowed her whole. Shadows clung to the carved oak panels, and high windows threw shafts of light across the polished marble floor. A row of portraits lined the walls, ancestors of grim countenance, all stern eyes and rigid postures, as though each one had borne the same weighty mantle of Blackthorn blood. Evelina's hands trembled at her sides. She longed to flee, to return to the modest cottage where her life had been simple, if difficult. But duty held her fast. A butler, tall and precise, bowed low. "Miss Harcourt, this way, if you please." She followed him through long corridors until they came to a set of double doors, their hinges gleaming brass. The butler rapped once, then opened them wide. Inside was a library vast enough to swallow her entire home. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, lined with leather-bound volumes. A fire burned low in the hearth, and at a heavy mahogany desk sat a man who might have been carved from the same dark stone as the manor itself, Lord Nathaniel Blackthorne. He rose as she entered, his frame tall, his shoulders broad beneath a coat of deep charcoal. His hair was dark as raven's wing, swept back neatly, and his face, handsome but not softened by charm, was marked by stern lines that spoke of years lived without ease. His eyes, however, were what held her, grey as storm clouds, sharp, assessing, and filled with something Evelina could not name. She curtsied low, forcing her voice steady. "My lord, I am Evelina Harcourt. I have come to repay my mother's debt." A silence followed, heavy as the carved beams above them. At last, Nathaniel stepped forward, his gaze never wavering. His voice was deep, measured, carrying the authority of one accustomed to obedience. "Miss Harcourt," he said slowly, "debts are not always paid in coin." Evelina's breath caught. Then, how am I to repay it? His eyes lingered on her face, and though his expression did not soften, something flickered there, something that unsettled her more than sternness ever could. "You will remain at Blackthorne Hall," Nathaniel said at last, "for your mother made me a promise, and now it falls to you to fulfill it." Her heart raced, confusion and dread warring within her. A promise? What promise could my mother have made? Nathaniel's lips pressed into a hard line. "One that binds you to me, Miss Harcourt, for better or worse." The fire crackled, the shadows deepened, and Evelina realized that her life was no longer her own. She had stepped into Blackthorne Hall to repay her mother's debt, but what awaited her was far greater and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Chapter 2: The Bargain. The firelight flickered across the shelves of the library, throwing long shadows against the gilded spines of books and the polished gleam of mahogany. Evelina stood very still, her gloved hands tightening around the reticule at her side as though it were a lifeline. Nathaniel Blackthorne's words still echoed in her ears. "One that binds you to me, Miss Harcourt, for better or worse." Her throat constricted. "My lord, forgive me, but I do not understand. My mother never spoke of this promise. Never." Nathaniel regarded her silently for a long moment, his grey eyes fixed upon her with a look that seemed to strip away her defenses. Finally he moved, walking past her to pour a measure of brandy into a crystal glass. The sound of liquid splashing into crystal was louder than the silence between them. "She would not have told you," he said at last, his voice low, steady. "Lady Celeste was a woman of pride. She feared what you might think of her if you knew." Evelina's breath hitched. "What did she promise you then? Speak plainly, I beg you." Nathaniel lifted the glass but did not drink. He stood before the fire, the light striking across the planes of his face. His expression was unreadable, yet his voice carried the weight of unspoken years. "She promised me her daughter's hand." The words struck like thunder. Evelina gasped, a flush rushing to her cheeks. "Her daughter's hand? In marriage?" He inclined his head slightly. "Yes." Her heart raced in disbelief. Surely this cannot be true. My mother would never." "She could not." "She did." Nathaniel's tone was quiet but final. "It was years ago, before you were grown. She came to me when she had nothing left but her pride and her love for you. I offered her protection, her debts forgiven, her reputation preserved. In return, she vowed that one day you would stand where you stand now." Evelina pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "You mean to say that my mother bartered me? That I am payment?" At this, Nathaniel's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something dark flashing in his storm-colored eyes. "No, do not mistake me. She did not sell you to me. She entrusted you. She believed I would be the one man who would keep you safe when she no longer could." Evelina's knees weakened, and she sank into the nearest chair, the soft velvet cushions swallowing her whole. The room seemed to tilt. Her mother's gentle smile, her warm embrace, the lullabies sung by candlelight. It did not reconcile with this revelation. "I cannot accept this," Evelina whispered, her voice breaking. "My life is not a debt to be settled. I am not a coin to be exchanged." Nathaniel set down the untouched glass, striding toward her. Though his movements were controlled, there was an intensity in them that made her pulse quicken. "You misunderstand me, Miss Harcourt," he said, his voice firmer now. "I do not demand your obedience, nor will I compel you to wed me by force. But the promise exists, and honor demands it be addressed. You are here because your mother trusted me, and I am a man who does not forget the weight of trust." His nearness was overwhelming. The breadth of his frame, the subtle scent of leather and wood smoke clinging to him. Evelina looked up, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she saw not just sternness, but something more complicated. Regret, loneliness, duty, heavy as chains. Still her defiance sparked. "If you honor my mother's memory, then you will give me the freedom to choose." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For a moment silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then slowly he inclined his head. "Very well," he said. "You will remain here at Blackthorn Hall as my guest. You will learn what it means to share this life, this house, this name. In time, you will decide whether to fulfill your mother's vow or to break it. But until that day, you are not to leave this place." The words landed like a decree. Evelina's heart pounded. She was trapped, yet not wholly without power. He had left the choice in her hands, but at the cost of her freedom. "I am a prisoner then," she said bitterly. Nathaniel's gaze softened, just barely, as though it pained him. "No, Miss Harcourt, a prisoner has no choice. You do." He turned away then, his coat swirling about him, and Evelina was left staring into the fire, her mind a storm. What life had she stepped into? A hole haunted by secrets, ruled by a man bound to a promise made long ago. And she, what was she now? A daughter carrying her mother's debt, a woman caught between honor and freedom, her heart whispered treacherously, and perhaps a bride. Chapter 3: Secrets of Blackthorn Hall. The days at Blackthorn Hall moved like shadows across a sundial, slow, heavy, and inevitable. Evelina woke each morning in a chamber grander than any room she had ever known. High ceilings painted with faded cherubs, velvet curtains heavy enough to shut out the world, and a bed so vast she often felt lost in its expanse. Yet for all its beauty, the room felt borrowed, as though she were an intruder in another woman's life. Servants attended her with quiet efficiency, their deference making her uneasy. She was no mistress of this house, no lady of rank, and yet they curtsied, calling her Miss Harcourt in tones laced with something she could not quite read. Respect, pity, suspicion. Evelina began to wander. The hall stretched like a labyrinth, its stone floors echoing her every step. The portraits of the Blackthorn line watched her from the walls, their eyes painted sharp and unyielding. Some faces bore striking resemblance to Nathaniel: stern brows, proud noses, that same unrelenting gaze. She could not help but shiver under their scrutiny. scrutiny. On the third afternoon of her stay, Evelina found herself drawn toward the east wing. The corridors there seemed quieter, more deserted, the air colder. Dust lay thick on the floorboards, and many of the doors were locked. Something about the silence beckoned her. At last, she came to a chamber whose door stood ajar. Hesitating only a moment, she pushed it open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. Dust motes drifted in the slanting light from a single window. Evelina's eyes adjusted, and what she saw made her breath catch. On the wall hung a portrait of a woman. Her hair was auburn, her eyes bright with mischief, her smile alive with warmth. She was beautiful in a way Evelina could not deny. Vibrant, elegant, unforgettable. Beneath the portrait, on a table draped in linen, lay objects preserved as though untouched by time. A small ivory comb, a pair of satin gloves, and, most heart-wrenching of all, a child's wooden toy horse, its paint chipped from play. Evelina's heart twisted. This was no ordinary room, it was a shrine. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached toward the toy, as if to brush away the dust of years. But before her fingers touched it, a voice, deep, sharp, and wounded, stopped her. "You should not be here." Evelina whirled around. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his face pale beneath its stern composure, his eyes darker than she had yet seen them. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate finality. "My lord," Evelina stammered, I did not mean to intrude. The door was left open, and You should not be here," he repeated, his voice quieter now, but edged with something she could not name. "Anger? Pain?" She swallowed hard. "Who is she?" Evelina asked softly, her gaze flickering to the portrait. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For a long time he said nothing, as though the words themselves cost too much to speak. At last, his voice emerged low, heavy with grief. "She was my wife." Evelina's breath stilled. "Lady Margaret," Nathaniel continued, his gaze fixed upon the portrait. "She died 8 years ago, along with our son." The silence that followed was unbearable, filled only by the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Evelina's chest ached as though the sorrow were her own. She turned her eyes to the little toy horse, her throat tight. I am sorry," she whispered, though the words felt hollow in the face of such loss. Nathaniel's expression did not change, yet his voice was raw. "The East Wing has remained closed since that day. You may now understand why?" Evelina lowered her gaze, shame flooding her. "Forgive me, I should not have entered. I only—" "Curiosity?" Nathaniel interrupted, though without malice. He let out a bitter breath, almost a laugh, but without joy. "It is natural. You are not the first to wonder what shadows haunt Blackthorn Hall. Only now you know." Evelina dared lift her eyes to him. He looked carved from stone, unyielding, yet she saw in his eyes a grief so deep it could not be measured. Her voice was trembling when she spoke. "And you live with this every day?" Nathaniel turned sharply away, his back to her. He did not answer. Instead, he crossed the room to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Light spilled in, pale and cold, illuminating the dust that swirled between them. "I live with it," he said at last, his voice a quiet thunder. "And so does this house. That is why you must understand. Debts are not only of money, Miss Harcourt. They are of blood, of trust, of promises broken and kept. This hall has been built on them, and so has my life." Evelina felt tears sting her eyes. Unbidden, she wanted to speak, to comfort him, but her tongue felt heavy. Instead, she bowed her head. "I did not come here to wound you, my lord, only to honor my mother's word. Whatever else may happen, I will not dishonor hers." Something shifted in his gaze then, a flicker of surprise, of respect, though he masked it swiftly. He gave a curt nod, the mask of lordship slipping back into place. "Then remember this," Nathaniel said, his voice regaining its stern edge. "There are rooms you must not enter, shadows you must not disturb. Blackthorn Hall is not a place for idle wanderings. It is a place of debts and of silence." With that he turned and left, leaving Evelina alone in the dim chamber. She stood for a long while, staring at the portrait of Lady Margaret, the woman whose shadow still lingered in every stone of this hall, and whose memory had shaped the man Evelina was now bound to. A question stirred in her heart, both frightening and undeniable. If his heart still belongs to the dead, what place is there for me? Chapter 4. The Dance of Pride and Heart. The following days passed with a strange rhythm Evelina could not ignore. Though Nathaniel had warned her away from the east wing, he did not banish her from the rest of the house. Instead, he seemed to test her in subtler ways, drawing her into meals where the silence pressed harder than the candlelight, inviting her on rides across the moors where the wind tangled her hair and his watchful eyes missed nothing. At first, Evelina resisted every unspoken attempt at closeness. She clung to her independence, reminding herself that she was here only to fulfill a promise, not to lose herself to a man whose grief still chained him to the past. Yet the more she saw of Nathaniel, the harder it became to hold to that conviction. He was stern, yes, but not unkind. His estate was tended with precision, his tenants spoke of him with respect, and his sister, Lady Helena, who visited often, spoke with quiet pride of his loyalty to family. Still, Evelina was not a woman to bow easily. One evening, as dusk spread its violet haze over the hills, Nathaniel invited her to the drawing room. A fire roared in the hearth, casting the room in gold. A chessboard stood between them, its pieces gleaming ivory and ebony. "Do you play?" Nathaniel asked, his voice calm but edged with challenge. "A little," Evelina admitted, settling into the chair opposite him. He arched one dark brow. "Then perhaps you will provide more worthy opposition than my steward." The game began. Evelina's hands trembled at first, but soon her nerves steadied. She met his gaze squarely, moving her pieces with careful thought. To her surprise, he seemed almost amused by her daring strategy. "You play boldly," he remarked, after she sacrificed a knight to trap his rook. "I play to win," she replied, lifting her chin. His eyes glinted, stormy but not unkind. "So do I." The tension between them grew, not only in the game, but in the air itself. Every brush of his sleeve against hers as he leaned forward, every moment his gaze lingered too long, every pause before his measured words. When at last she won, sweeping his king into checkmate, she could not resist a smile of triumph. "You underestimate me, my lord," she said lightly. Nathaniel's lips curved, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. "So it seems. Perhaps I shall not make that mistake again." The next day brought a surprise Evelina had not anticipated. Lady Helena arrived, her carriage sweeping into the courtyard with a flourish. She was younger than Nathaniel by some years, her manner warm, her wit quick. At once she took Evelina into her confidence. "My dear," Helena said, looping her arm through Evelina's as they walked the gardens, "you must forgive my brother. He wears his solemnity like a second coat, but I assure you there is a heart beneath it." Evelina hesitated. "I do not know if that heart has room for anyone." Helena's eyes softened, though her tone was teasing. "Ah, but you have already made him speak more than he has in years. I dare say you have unsettled him." Before Evelina could reply, Helena clapped her hands together. "It is settled. We shall host a small ball. Nothing grand, just a gathering of friends and neighbors. You shall attend, and my brother will have no choice but to see you as others do." "A ball?" Evelina's heart thudded. "Lady Helena, Helena, if you please," she interrupted with a grin. "And yes, a ball. You must dance, Evelina. It will do you good, and perhaps him as well." The evening of the ball arrived with the manor transformed. The great hall, once shadowed and still, glittered with candlelight and music. Musicians played a lively waltz, servants bustled with trays of wine, and the air filled with laughter, sounds that felt almost alien in Blackthorn Hall. Evelina descended the staircase in a gown of deep sapphire, the silk catching every flicker of light. Her hair, pinned with delicate pearls, framed her face with a softness she had not known she possessed. For a moment, as she looked over the gathered guests, she felt like someone else entirely. Not the daughter of debt, not a woman bound by promises, but a lady in her own right. Then her gaze found Nathaniel. He stood across the hall, dressed in black and silver, his presence commanding. When his eyes met hers, the breath caught in her throat. His gaze swept over her, slow, deliberate, unguarded, and in that instant Evelina knew. Whatever else haunted him, she had shaken something awake in his soul. Helena, true to her word, swept Evelina into introductions, but it was Nathaniel who claimed her hand for the first dance. Their hands touched, his warm, steady, hers trembling. As the music swelled, they moved together, steps measured, eyes locked, the world around them blurred until there was nothing but the rhythm of their movement, the pull of his hand at her waist, the unspoken current that passed between them. "You dance well," Nathaniel murmured, his voice low enough for her ears alone. Evelina dared to smile. "So do you, for a man so fond of shadows." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "And you are far too bold for a woman who claims she does not belong here." "Perhaps I do not," she replied softly, her gaze rising to meet his. "But tonight, I almost believe I do." The music ended, but Nathaniel did not release her hand at once. Their eyes lingered, words unspoken hovering in the charged silence, but pride held them both back. Evelina, unwilling to surrender her independence. Nathaniel, afraid to let go of grief and open himself again. And so, though the night glittered with laughter and music, beneath it all lay a tension unbroken, a storm gathering quietly in the space between them. That night, as Evelina retired to her chamber, she touched her lips unconsciously, as though the ghost of his nearness still lingered there. And Nathaniel, alone in his study, stared into the dying fire and whispered to the shadows, "Margaret, forgive me," for he had not thought to feel again, but with Evelina Harcourt he was beginning to. Chapter 5. shadows of betrayal. The ball had left the manor echoing with laughter long after the guests had departed. But by morning, silence reclaimed its throne. Servants bustled about, clearing garlands and extinguished candles. Yet Evelina wandered the corridors restless, her heart still unsteady from the memory of Nathaniel's hand in hers. Every glance he had given her during the dance replayed in her mind. Warm, searching, dangerous. Evelina wanted to believe it had been real, that beneath his grief lay a man capable of affection, but doubt gnawed at her, sharp and insistent. It was during one of her solitary walks that she heard voices. She had taken a side passage near the gallery, the one lined with blackthorn ancestors, when a low murmur carried from the next room. The door stood slightly ajar, the voices clearer now. "You cannot be serious, Nathaniel," a man said, his tone laced with disdain. "To wed her, the daughter of Celeste Harcourt, she is nothing more than a reminder of a debt, an old promise that should have died with her mother." Evelina froze, her blood running cold. She knew that voice. It belonged to Lord Edwin, Nathaniel's cousin, whose sharp eyes at the ball had unsettled her. Nathaniel's reply came, quiet but firm. "It is not your concern, Edwin. My decisions are my own." Edwin scoffed. "Your decisions? Or your pride? You cling to promises like chains? You would drag yourself into marriage not for love, not for family, but for honor? She is no bride, Nathaniel. She is a pawn." Evelina pressed her hand to her chest, the words piercing like a blade. "A pawn." Her pulse thundered as she strained to hear Nathaniel's answer. "I will hear no more of this," Nathaniel said sharply, steel in his voice. "You forget yourself." But Edwin laughed, the sound bitter. "Do I see more clearly than you. You seek redemption in her, a chance to prove yourself honorable, as though that will silence the ghosts of this hall. But mark me, cousin, such a union will ruin you both. You cannot bury grief beneath duty." Silence followed, tense and heavy. Evelina could bear no more. She turned and fled down the corridor, her slippers striking the floor like thunder in her ears. That evening she could not bring herself to face Nathaniel at supper. Instead, she remained in her chamber, the untouched tray of food cooling by the hearth. Her thoughts tangled endlessly. Was Edwin right? Was she nothing more than a debt to Nathaniel? A symbol of promises he refused to let die? When at last she heard a knock, her heart stilled. "Miss Harcourt," came Nathaniel's voice from beyond the door, deep and steady. Evelina clenched her fists. She wanted to open the door, to look into his storm-grey eyes and demand the truth. But fear held her back, fear of what his answer might be. "I am unwell," she called softly. "Forgive me, my lord." A pause, silence. Then his voice again, quieter this time. "As you wish. Rest, Evelina." His footsteps retreated, leaving her in the flickering light of the fire, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. The following days stretched into a strained dance of avoidance. Evelina kept to the gardens, the library, anywhere Nathaniel was not. Yet everywhere she turned, she felt his presence, watching, waiting, perhaps wounded by her distance. It was Edwin who found her first. "My dear Miss Harcourt," he said smoothly, appearing in the rose garden as she sat reading. His smile was sharp, his eyes sly. "You seem troubled." Evelina closed her book, her voice cool. "I did not invite your company, Lord Edwin." "Ah, but perhaps you need it," he countered, taking a seat beside her unbidden. "You see, I know my cousin well, too well, and I fear you do not." She stiffened. "Say what you mean, sir." Edwin leaned closer, lowering his voice. Nathaniel is a man shackled by ghosts. His every decision, every action is to appease the dead, his wife, his son, your mother. He does not see you, Evelina. He sees only promises, debts, obligations. Tell me, is that the life you wish for yourself? To be nothing more than a debt repaid? Her heart wavered, torn between anger and doubt. His words echoed too closely the fear that had haunted her since overhearing their conversation. "You presume too much," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Edwin smiled, satisfied. "I presume nothing. I simply speak what you already know in your heart." He rose, bowed, and left her alone with her thoughts, his words like poison taking root. That night, Evelina stood by her window, watching the moors stretch dark beneath the silver moon. The wind howled, rattling the panes like a warning. Her heart was a battlefield. Does he see me, or does he see only my mother's promise? Am I Evelina to him, or am I only Celeste's daughter, a debt waiting to be claimed? As the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Evelina knew she could not remain in limbo much longer. Something would have to break, her pride, his grief, or the fragile bond between them. Chapter 6. The Storm and the Confession. The storm broke over Blackthorn Hall with a fury that shook its ancient walls. Thunder rolled across the moors, lightning carved jagged veins through the sky, and rain lashed against the windows in unrelenting torrents. Evelina stood in the library, restless, her hands trembling as she tried to read, but the words on the page blurred. Her mind would not still. Every glance, every word of Nathaniel's, since that night she overheard Edwin, haunted her. Does he care for me, or is it duty alone? The fire cracked in the grate, but even its warmth could not ease the cold that clung to her. She longed to flee the house, the storm, the questions swirling inside her, but she had no refuge left. At last, her turmoil drove her into the corridor. The storm's roar seemed to pull her steps, guiding her toward the east wing, the place Nathaniel had forbidden her. Something inside whispered that the answers lay there, behind those locked doors. Her heart pounded as she reached the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. The handle was cold beneath her hand. To her surprise, it turned. The door creaked open. Within lay a chamber untouched by time. A woman's portrait hung above the mantel. Margaret Blackthorn, fair and serene, her painted eyes filled with quiet grace. Toys sat abandoned in the corner. A wooden horse, a tiny drum, a cradle draped in faded lace. Dust coated everything, but the air carried the unmistakable weight of grief. Evelina's throat tightened. This was the shrine of Nathaniel's heart, his wife, his child. "You should not be here." The voice cut through the stillness like a blade. She spun around, breath catching. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his face shadowed, his eyes burning with a storm fiercer than the one outside. "I, Evelina," faltered. "Forgive me, I did not mean—" "You disobeyed me," he said, his voice low, trembling with restrained fury. "I told you this wing was forbidden." "I know," she whispered, her chest aching, "but I had to see. I had to understand." His jaw clenched. "Understand what?" Her courage wavered, but she forced the words out. "What I am to you, Nathaniel. Am I Evelina? Or am I only her daughter, a debt you must repay, a duty to honor your pride? Tell me the truth, for I cannot bear this silence any longer." Lightning lit the room, flashing across his face. His eyes were dark, anguished. "You think you are only a debt to me?" he demanded, his voice raw. "I do not know what to think. Her voice cracked, tears burning her eyes. Your cousin says I am nothing but a pawn, and when I hear you speak of promises and duty, I wonder if he is right, if every look, every word has been nothing more than obligation. Nathaniel strode forward, seizing her hand with sudden, desperate force. His touch burned through her trembling. Obligation? His voice shook. Do you think I would bring you into this house, into my grief, if it were only obligation? Do you think I would let myself feel this dangerous, unbidden thing, if it were mere duty? Her breath caught. Feel what? For a moment, his mask cracked. Pain and longing warred across his features. He looked at Margaret's portrait, then back at Evelina, and his voice broke. I loved her, he whispered hoarsely. God help me. I loved her more than life itself. And when she died, when my son died, I swore I would never feel again. I built these walls, these chains, to keep the world away, and yet, he cupped her face suddenly, his hand trembling against her cheek. Yet you came, fierce, proud, unafraid. You have haunted me, Evelina Harcourt, and I do not know how to stop it. I cannot look at you without feeling the earth shift beneath me. Tears blurred her vision. Then why push me away? Why let me believe I was nothing? Because I was afraid. The words tore from him like thunder. Afraid that if I let you in, I would betray her memory. Afraid that if I gave my heart again, it would be torn from me once more. But I cannot. His voice broke. I cannot deny it any more. Evelina, it is not duty that binds me to you. It is you. The storm howled beyond the windows, but inside the chamber, silence fell. Thick, trembling, alive. Evelina's heart pounded as she searched his face, raw with confession. Slowly she placed her hand over his, holding it against her cheek. Then let the past rest, Nathaniel. Let the ghosts stay here, where they belong. I am not Margaret. I do not ask you to forget her, only to see me for who I am, for what I feel. His breath shuddered, as if the weight of years pressed upon him. Then, with a groan of surrender, he pulled her into his arms. His lips found hers, fierce, desperate, hungry with all the emotion he had locked away for so long. The kiss was fire in the storm, breaking down every wall, every fear. Evelina clung to him, her tears mingling with rain from the cracked window, her heart answering his in a cry she could not speak. When at last they parted, his forehead pressed to hers. Nathaniel whispered, Forgive me, Evelina. Forgive the pride, the silence, the shadows, for now you are the only light I can see. Her voice trembled, but it was steady with truth. And you, Nathaniel, are the only home I have ever wanted. But beyond the door, unseen, another figure lingered. Edwin, his face twisted with malice, had heard every word, and as the storm raged on, so too did the shadow of betrayal grow darker, threatening to tear apart what had only just been found. Chapter 7. A union of love, not debt. The days that followed the storm were unlike any Evelina had ever known. Blackthorn Hall, once wrapped in silence and grief, seemed to breathe again. Servants went about their tasks with lighter steps. Lady Helena hummed through the corridors as if she had waited years for this change, and Nathaniel himself carried a calm resolve that softened the stern lines of his face. The banns were read in the village church, the small parish abuzz with whispers and blessings. The people who had long respected Nathaniel for his honor now looked on with quiet joy, for they saw something in his eyes they had not seen in years. Hope On the morning of the wedding, Blackthorn Hall was transformed. Roses trailed along the pews of the chapel, their fragrance mingling with beeswax and fresh greenery. White lace adorned the altar, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the floor with brilliant colors, as if heaven itself had come to bear witness. Evelina stood at the threshold of the chapel, her hands trembling lightly against her bouquet. Her gown was simple yet elegant, a gown she had sewn herself with the help of Helena, its soft ivory folds falling like water around her. Pearls gleamed in her hair, but it was not the finery that gave her radiance. It was the quiet joy in her eyes. Lady Helena squeezed her hand. "You look beautiful," she whispered. "And more than that, you look happy. That is all my brother ever needed." Evelina smiled, her throat tight with emotion. "So do I," she breathed, "though I never thought I would find it here of all places." The chapel doors opened, and the murmurs hushed. Evelina stepped forward, each step measured, her heart beating like wings within her chest. At the altar, Nathaniel stood waiting. For a moment she saw him as she had first seen him, a man wrapped in shadows, guarded and grim. But today those shadows had lifted. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes, softened as they found hers, and in their depths was no duty, no debt, only a love as steady as the stone beneath their feet. When she reached him, he took her hand, his touch warm, grounding her trembling. He leaned closer, just enough for her to hear. "Are you certain, Evelina?" His voice was low, almost reverent. "This life, this man," she smiled, her eyes shining. "I came to repay my mother's debt, Nathaniel, but I stay because I have found my heart." His lips curved in the faintest smile, and together they turned to the vicar. The vows were spoken, steady and true. "I, Nathaniel Blackthorn, take thee, Evelina Harcourt, to be my wedded wife, not for duty nor for promise, but for love." Her voice trembled, but did not falter. "I, Evelina Harcourt, take thee, Nathaniel Blackthorn, to be my wedded husband, not for obligation, but for the freedom of choosing you." When the final words were sealed and Nathaniel drew her into his arms, the hall seemed to change. Where once grief had lingered in every corner, now joy resonated like music. Where once silence had ruled, now the future spoke in laughter and light. The people of the parish rejoiced. Lady Helena wept openly with joy, and even the stern walls of Blackthorn Hall seemed to soften, as though the manor itself had longed for this union. As they stepped from the chapel hand in hand, the storm of the past lay behind them. Evelina had come to repay her mother's debt, but in doing so she had found freedom, a partner, and a love far deeper than any promise of yesterday. Nathaniel pressed a kiss to her hand and whispered for her alone. "The story of Blackthorn Hall is no longer one of loss, Evelina. It is ours now, one of love, of redemption, and of tomorrow." And with that they stepped into the sunlight together, husband and wife, ready to write a new chapter of life, not bound by debt, but by the enduring strength of the heart.